It's interesting to look back at some of the original ideas we had for Rise of the Spartans, scenes that were cut or deleted or changed, and to think about how the story would be different had they been left in. When we were first coming up with the concept for Rise of the Spartans, and we decided that Spartans were going to get teleported off of Reach and onto Halo, there was actually an idea that one of the Spartans wouldn't get teleported and would actually be stuck back on Reach for a few parts. This would have been interesting to help show what was going on Reach after the Spartans had left. When I was coming up with the character for Night Flash, he was kind of supposed to be this kind of tech-savvy, engineer kind of guy, and I was actually going to introduce him as having invented his own teleporter, which they were going to use to teleport off Reach. And I had this whole idea about, he had built this thing and he was kind of hiding it somewhere on the map Reflection, although ultimately there was no way I could really show a teleporter on the map Reflection, and it didn't really make sense for him to have built one his own. So we used the map Breakpoint, which added that entire scene and the character Blake. When Night Flash first showed up on Halo, he was actually supposed to meet up with Fido and stay with Fido for a while, instead of Fido just running off. And in addition to that, he was supposed to meet up with the Monitor, Contrite, and Night Flash, Fido, and Contrite were supposed to be together, kind of alone for a few parts before meeting up with Archangel. The Gungnir Spartan model was actually initially going to be used for some kind of robotic droids that Oni sent to track down and kill the Spartans after they left Reach. This would have actually introduced a whole new character, who actually was a Spartan who had gone rogue, and he was being hunted by these droids for a while, and he knew how to deal with them and handle them. The story between Raptor and Ocelot was actually supposed to be the exact other way around. Before I'd even begun thinking of Rise of the Spartans, I had an idea for a movie about an elite and a Spartan, and the elite was the prisoner, and the Spartan actually kind of helped train the elite how to use the sword. But then when I went into Rise of the Spartans, I figured I could still kind of tell the story, but instead Raptor was the one kind of helping Ocelot out. In Part 5, the Falcon team was supposed to already be at the island, although we of course changed this because it seemed a bit strange that a Falcon team would have been, right next to Archangel this whole time and not really helped out. When the Spartans arrived at the island, they were actually supposed to receive new armor that they found kind of laying around in crates and stuff, and they were supposed to, change into new colors and new armor pieces. When we first started body acting, we didn't really have much armor to choose from when we designed the characters. By the time of Part 5, we had unlocked most of the armor, so I was going to allow the voice actors to change their armor if they wanted to, but ultimately, nobody really wanted to change their armor at that point anyway. Also in Part 5, Night Flash was supposed to vault over the Warthog, which Swift catapulted off of, and Swift would have catapulted off and took down the first Banshee, and then Night Flash was going to jump off the Warthog, which was flying through the air, and then grab the second Banshee. Ultimately, this became too much visual effects too early on, which I didn't know how to do at the time, so we ended up cutting it out and just having the Warthog take out the second Banshee. And it was kind of interesting because I still left the shot of Night Flash running towards the Warthog in the original. So if you watch the original, you can actually see him running towards it as if he's about to vault over it, but then I couldn't pull that off, so I never actually retook that shot until the director's cut. I started writing the Part 6 script long before we actually began production on Part 6, and I actually had gotten about a quarter into the script. I just decided it wasn't working, so I ended up deleting the entire script and starting all over. One of the scenes I remember from this original script was a scene where Brass was actually receiving his armor colors, because you see in the original script I wrote up, the Spartans weren't given specific colors. They didn't have the 4 colors, like the green, the blue, the yellow, and the gold. They actually had unique colors. But then of course when I realized I was going to use Forge, I had to force it down into 4 colors. But anyway, this original scene had Brass receiving his colors early on, and he was given a color that he didn't like, and he was trying to argue and try to have his own color, and it's supposed to show how, of course, these Spartans are a little bit different, and they had a little more personality, and they weren't just receiving anything they were given. And Night Flash actually came up and kind of helped Brass out, and that's kind of how Brass and Night Flash first met, because they wanted to receive their own custom colors, whereas the Academy was trying to give them forced colors. Initially, Angie was just an AI built into the Academy, and you could kind of access her at certain little terminals, and she'd kind of help you out. I forget exactly why we changed it, but at one point we wanted to have her walking around for something. In retrospect, I think actually our original idea of having her, part of the system and built into the place would have actually been a lot more interesting. In the director's cut, when we were showing Night Flash being tortured by Oni, there was actually initially a lot more ideas we had of showing separate little torture moments that Oni was doing to him. Some of them involved like some really messed up stuff where they'd they had live elites that Oni had captured, and were kind of like releasing on Night Flash and making him learn to really kill elites and stuff, and show him who the true enemies were. But ultimately, during that scene, I ended up... It initially was running at about 7 or 8 minutes for that whole scene, and I just felt it was kind of dragging on too long for torture. What I wanted to do was rather make it this kind of shorter, really quick, just kind of flashes of memories he had during the torture, and to make it less real-time and kind of feel more like flashbacks and bad memories he was having and kind of lose track of reality. Sergeant Rorschach, who plays Perseus, was actually supposed to be the voice actor for Spectre. He had actually done the first half of his lines in Part 2, then upon going on vacation and I couldn't get the rest of his lines, I had someone else replace him. The ODSTs in Part 5, who were with Whisper and Brass, were supposed to be a bit more developed as characters. I think I even gave them some lines and had Jazz Millennium record some lines for one of the ODSTs, but in the end I didn't think they'd really be showing back up anyway, so their lines got cut out. In Part 7, the Scorpion that was destroyed in the Battle of Part 5 was supposed to be somewhat repaired, and I was going to have a scene where only the turret was operational, but they couldn't actually drive it around, so they were going to kind of be defending this Scorpion, which was kind of being used as like their main cannon. Sev was actually supposed to disappear in the end of Part 5 when he walks off, and not reappear until at the very end in Part 9 when he shows back up to finish his deal, which would have made it a lot more of a surprise when he returns. But as we found out, he was just too much of an interesting character to just leave off to the side, so we kind of brought him into the foreground a lot more. When the Spartans moved off to Ridgeline, there was actually supposed to be a Mongoose team that was already there. We ended up changing this team to the ODST team you see run by Donnelly. One of the things I think was cut that I kind of most regret was in Part 8, Thel was actually supposed to have a lot more development after he took hold of the Spire. He was actually supposed to round up those elites, and instead of just staying there and letting himself be killed, he actually moved off and started going to other elite locations and rousing up more elites at different places, and he ended up kind of amassing a pretty large army, and he was supposed to use the forces he had gathered and combine them with the White Lance, which shows up in Part 9, and have kind of a little bit bigger of a role in the finale. I think there's a point where we were talking about how it didn't really make much sense that the Scorpions would be able to, you know, get out of the Gulch and end up in Ridgeline, so we were saying it might make more sense if the Scorpions stayed in the Gulch. We were actually going to use them as kind of artillery, and they'd be firing artillery onto Ridgeline, and there would have been actually 2 battles going on at the same time. There would have been a Ridgeline battle and a Gulch battle going on simultaneously, and they were kind of interacting together. Before Whisper dies, there was actually an idea that Ryan would actually come out and die alongside her, but I think there just started becoming a little bit too much shipping between them two. They started getting a little bit weird, so we ended up having Ryan survive until the end. When I first flowcharted Part 9 out, Swift and Night Flash were supposed to duel directly after the scene where Swift goes inclement weather. However, when I looked at the flowchart, I realized it would have been going from a really dramatic and emotional scene of a Spartan death suddenly to this not very dramatic at all conversation between Storm and Usku. So when I had it moved around, it turned out much better, because we ended up going from that kind of dramatic Spartan death into the dramatic scene where Usku confronts Rogoth in that final room. My original idea for Night Flash's death actually involved him taking off his helmet, and I had this cool idea where I'd kind of have him just kind of stand up, and you just see his helmet land beside him as if he just kind of took it off, as if he was kind of resigning from the end. But I think I just took it out because it didn't make much sense, and it would have been more editing than it was really worth. After Swift deactivated the halo from firing, he was supposed to just kind of walk off to his death almost. I actually had this scene scripted out where he was talking to Cassie, and he was like, well, there's nothing left for me to do anymore. You know, time to finish our own journey. And he was supposed to actually just kind of walk off, and like the rest of the elites come flooding down the hallway, and he was just going to kind of let himself be killed. He just kind of stood there as like the elites were like shooting at him, and suddenly the door closes and Contrite shows up and is like, no, you can't let yourself die. However, then when we started looking at it, it just seemed weird for Swift to just kind of stand there and let himself die, so we kind of refilmed the scene so that the elites shoot at him, he kind of starts backing up and looking like he's about to get a little more defensive. After the regeneration scene, when we were showing scenes in Powerhouse and Boneyards, we'd actually wanted to show it kind of gleaning with a little bit more life and like vegetation. I was going to try to put leaves on the trees and grass on the ground, but it ended up just being too much visual effects, and I didn't think it was really necessary. In the Ocelot flashback at the end of Part 9, there's actually a scene where Whisper comes in and kind of helps Ocelot, you know, take his mind off things. And in the version you see, she takes him out and they kind of go walking by like Moa or something. Initially, actually, Whisper was supposed to take Ocelot outside and do target practice on the birds flying by and hunt some of the flying birds around. However, when I went to film it, I realized you couldn't actually shoot the birds. They wouldn't, or you could shoot them, but they wouldn't die. So it looked kind of weird. And also, I thought it was just kind of strange when you think about it. It's trying to take your mind off things and you just go out shooting birds and seem kind of morbid. Way back when we were kind of first realizing there'd be this whole regeneration scene and they'd have to eventually go back to Earth and, you know, face Oni again, I knew there was going to have to be, you know, some kind of resolution between the Spartans and the office. And initially we had this idea of more like a big courtroom type thing, kind of like what happened in Part 6 with Night Flash giving his speech in the original Part 6 of Rise of the Spartans. And when they get back to Earth, they're supposed to have a similar kind of thing, just a large room with all of Oni and a whole bunch of different people, and all these other parties were coming and giving their, you know, witnesses and references and stuff. I think it ended up just, when we were kind of planning it out, it just seemed weird. It was kind of too hard on body acting to have like a big courtroom, and it didn't really, the whole Ford set didn't really seem to coexist with Headlong very well. So we ended up just filming it in that little room with the little TVs. Those are just 25 scenes that didn't make it into the Rise of the Spartans. It's definitely interesting to think about how the story would have changed if they were still in.